Hi everyone, I'm George and I'm here with Wex in Turkey for Sony's brand new event where they're unveiling lots of incredible releases, the most notable of which is the brand new A9 III. This is the world's fastest ever mirrorless camera, and it's actually the world's first ever full frame camera that boasts a global shutter. It also can shoot incredibly quickly, so it can go all the way up to 120 frames per second when you're shooting in continuous mode, and that is with full autofocus with no blackout whatsoever. So it's incredibly well designed for sports and wildlife. For anybody that doesn't know what a global shutter is, I'll explain that for you now. We're used to seeing rolling shutters in cameras. That's potentially the camera you own may well have a rolling shutter. The way that works is it processes images from the sensor line by line, so it does it from top to bottom. This can be a little bit annoying, especially if you are filming fast-moving subjects, or actually also if you're moving your camera very quickly, so if you're doing a really quick pan, you might see some distortion there. Global shutters are global, so they capture the entire sensor all at once, which means you're not going to see any issues with that kind of warping and that kind of distortion. That's really exciting for people that do incredibly fast moving subjects, things like sports, or if you just like to do really quick pans, which again also lends itself quite well to sports. That pairs itself perfectly with the 120 frames a second continuous shooting. If you're photographing something incredibly quick, that means that you can pinpoint the exact moment that you want to choose for your final image, which is really nice. It just gives you so much flexibility, or again, it's so well suited for something like sports where action can happen in an instant. Pair that with the fact that you get full autofocus control and no blackout means that you just get so much freedom when you're shooting in your 120. When you're utilizing something like 120 frames a second, you can shoot up to 192 frames, which might not sound like enough because that's actually only about 1.6 seconds of continuous shooting at one moment, but you're not really going to want to shoot for much more than 1.6 seconds anyway, because you're going to get so many images back from that. It's not like you're going to need to hold that down for like 5 seconds or something. I think it's more about capturing particular moments rather than always utilizing that 120. Obviously, it also has things like 60 frames a second and 30 frames a second, so you don't always need to shoot at that 120. You can still shoot at a very high continuous rate that is a little dialed down. When using that 120, you can actually also shoot 14-bit RAW files, so you're not limited to JPEGs or just HEIFs or anything like that. It's a 26.4 megapixel sensor, so that's quite a nice size because you're going to get nice, big, high detail images, but they're not going to be so unbelievably huge that they're incredibly difficult to manage. So I think that's a really nice sweet spot there. If you do want to use your own flash as well, it can actually sync up to any speed, and that's because the shutter speed, the maximum quickest shutter speed, it goes all the way up to 1/80,000th of a second, which is crazy quick. You're also never going to have any issues when you're filming in artificially lit environments. You know, you might be familiar with those black bands that sometimes come across the screen. Again, that's because of the global shutter reading all those pixels at once. Now, for anybody who's already familiar with global shutters, you may well be aware that actually sometimes they can suffer from having slightly less dynamic range than a rolling shutter sensor. I haven't got any official numbers from Sony on that, so I can't tell you exactly how much dynamic range it has, but we've been told by Sony that it hasn't been compromised on and that it's still very good. Unfortunately, I've only had a few hours with the camera, so I've been able to shoot some stills, shoot a little bit of video, but I haven't actually been able to do any detailed tests, so you might have to wait to find out the exact figures on the dynamic range. But there's still more amazing features for people like sports photographers, and that's the fact that you can use something called PreCapture. That means that when you start hitting the shutter, actually if you have PreCapture turned on, then it will still capture those images from before you hit the shutter. That can be modified all the way through to 1 second. So that means that actually you could hit the shutter and you would still capture images from an entire second before you hit the shutter, which is really amazing. That means that you're never gonna miss a moment. I was utilizing that a lot when we were doing stuff like archery. We went to go photograph some archery. And of course, you don't know if you've got your camera on the target board when the actual arrow is going to come into frame. So you can turn on your PreCapture, you can have yourself framed up, and then as soon as that arrow hits the target, you can hit the shutter and know that actually you'll have captured the frames before it does so. When it comes to video, these specs are also incredibly impressive. So we've got 4K up to 60p, and that 4K is actually downsampled from 6K. So you're going to have a little bit more detail in there. It's not giving you a 6K file, but it's sort of shooting at 6K and then outputting it in 4K just to give you a little more detail there. It also shoots 4K 120 with no crop, which is really nice. You can film these modes in 10-bit 422, and actually if you plug in an external recorder, you can go all the way up to 16-bit raw video. So if you want all that detail, it's there if you have an external recorder. It also has the usual color stuff that we expect to see. So you can film in S-Cinetone if you want, and you can film in S-Log 3. So if you want a really nice profile straight out the tin, you've got S-Cine. And if you want to do a grading workflow, then S-Log 3 is probably going to be the best choice. In terms of price, it's £6,100 upon release, which is expensive. But it is a top of the range camera that's really well designed for sports and wildlife, both professional photographers. So yes, it's an expensive camera, but it's not your average amateur, photography camera. It is absolute top of the range for these particular niches. So I do think it's a little bit too expensive, but I also think a lot of people will buy it because if you do that kind of thing, then it is the best Sony system that you can get. But that's not the only release that they had to tell us about, because they also released a 300mm f2.8 G Master lens. This completes their series of telephoto primes because they already had a 400mm and a 600mm, so it's nice that they've added a 300 too. I've been testing that out today, and I'd say the most notable thing about that is the fact that the autofocus is incredibly impressive and it's really light. It weighs 1,470 grams and it feels really nice to use. I was using it with the A9 III, so I was using the new camera and the new lens, and it felt really good. The price of that lens is £5,800 upon release, which again is expensive, but it's a 300mm f2.8, it's a very niche lens. Not everybody's going to want to buy it, so it does make sense that it's going to be a little bit pricey. It also has that G Master tag, which is always going to add a little bit of money, but does assure you of that amazing optical quality. I've really enjoyed testing both these products out. I think they're amazing. I think the global shutter in the A9 III is so incredibly exciting, but I've got to go because I'm just about to lose the light here in Turkey. So I'll see you guys next time.